right, ladies, we are doing tradition 4 today, and as usual, we're going to read short form and long form from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're going to read from the Traditions illustrated pamphlet. We are going to read from the 12 by 12, so if you have a 12 by 12, please put your happy little blue hand up, and we will take turns. And then we will go through the Traditions checklist from the AA Grapevine for a topic and discussion. So we will start in the Big Book quickly with it's on 561 and 2 in the 4th edition. So Tradition 4, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. And Tradition 4, long form, with respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. But when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups, also, those groups ought to be consulted. And no group, regional committee, or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. On such issues, our common welfare is paramount. And for those who do not know what autonomous means, autonomous, if we look up the word, is having the freedom to govern itself or its own affairs. So that is the definition of autonomous. Might as well get that in there too. The 12 Traditions illustrated, Tradition 4 says, a member who does any amount of traveling finds the AA spirit much the same everywhere. But apart from this inward kinship, there are vast differences among groups. Here, the traveler finds 3 members discussing the steps in somebody's living room. There, 300 listening to speakers in a church auditorium. In one part of the U.S., respectful silence greets the speaker who begins, "My name is Anne, and I am an alcoholic." In another, everyone happily shouts, "Hi, Anne!" and she begins. In many other places, she may introduce herself with her full name at an hour meeting or a 90-minute meeting. In each neighborhood and in every part of the world reached by AA, the local group is free to work out its own customs. As always, freedom brings responsibility. Because each group is autonomous, it's up to each group to avoid any action that may harm AA. And there have been such actions, or this tradition would be unnecessary. Implicit throughout AA's traditions, Bill W. wrote, is the confession that our fellowship has its sins. We admit that we have character defects as a society, and these defects threaten us continually. Blown up to multiple size, the big ego may inspire one group to take over all public information work for its area without consulting any of the other local groups. Once the group has decided, we have all the answers, the lid's off. The group may then decide, let's say, the 11th tradition is outdated technicality. This is a competitive age. We are going to come right out and give some good AA, some good vigorous promoting. To the general public, this is one conspicuous group is AA. Its antics reflect not only on the ignored neighboring groups, but on the entire fellowship. In a way, the 4th tradition is like the 4th step. It suggests that the AA group should take an honest inventory of itself, asking about each of its independently planned actions. Would this break any tradition? Like the individual member who chooses to make the steps his or her guide toward happy sobriety, the wise group recognizes that the traditions are not hindering technicalities. They are approved guides toward the chief objective to all AA groups. Now we'll move on over to the 12 by 12, the common term for the 12 traditions and 12 steps, and we'll start at the top. Marianne, it's page 146 for those searching. Go ahead, Marianne. Oh, gotta unmute you. There you go. Oh, what's going on?
Okay.
There we go.
Tradition 4. Thank you for asking me to read. Each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting the other group or AA as a whole. Autonomy is a $10 word, but in relationship to us, it means very simply that every AA group can manage its own affairs exactly as it pleases, except when AA as a whole is threatened. Comes now the same question raised in Tradition 1. Isn't such liberty foolishly dangerous? Over the years, every conceivable deviation from our 12th step and 12th tradition has been tried. There was sure to be, since we were so strongly a band of ego-driven individuals, children of chaos. We have definitely played with every brand of fire, only to emerge unharmed and, we think, wiser. These very deviations created a vast process of trial and error, which under the grace of God has brought us to where we stand today. When AA's traditions were first published in 1946, we had become sure that an AA group could stand almost any amount of battering. We saw that the group, exactly like the individual, must eventually conform to whatever tested principles would guarantee survival. We had discovered that there were perfect safety in the process of trial and error. So confident of this, we had become that the original statement of AA tradition carried this significant sentence. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves the AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. Pass.
Thank you. Alex?
Hi. I'm Catherine, actually.
Oh, Catherine, sorry. I'll change it.
Okay. I can't change it for some reason on this. I just won't let me change it. Okay. This meant, of course, that we had been given the courage to declare each AA group an individual entity, strictly reliant on its own conscience as a guide to action. In charting this enormous expanse of freedom, we found it necessary to post only 2 storm signals. A group ought not to do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor ought it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else. There would be real danger should we commence to call some groups wet, others dry, still others Republican or Communist, and yet others Catholic or Protestant. The AA group would have to stick to its course or be hopelessly lost. Sobriety had to be its sole objective. In all other respects, there was perfect freedom of will and action. Each group had the right to be wrong. Pass.
Bonnie?
Thank you. When AA was still young, lots of eager groups were forming. In a town we'll call Middleton, a real crackerjack had started up. Townspeople were as hot as firecrackers about it. Stargazing, the elders dreamed of innovations. They figured the town needed a great big alcoholic center, a kind of pilot plant. AA groups could duplicate everywhere. Beginning on the ground floor, there would be a club. In the second story, they would sober up drunks and hand them currency for their back debts. The third deck would house an educational project, quite non-controversial, of course. In imagination, the gleaming center was to go up several stories more, but 3 would do for a start. This would all take a lot of money, other people's money. Believe it or not, wealthy townsfolk bought the idea. Pass.
Thank you. Irene?
There were, though, a few conservative dissenters among the alcoholics. They wrote the foundation. AA's headquarters in New York wanted to know about the sort of streamlining. They understood that the elders, just to nail things down good, were about to apply the foundation for the charter. These few were disturbed and skeptical. Of course, there was a promoter in the deal, a super promoter. By his eloquence, he allayed all fears, despite advice from the foundation that it could issue no charter, and that ventures which mixed an AA group with medication and education had come to sticky ends elsewhere. To make things safer, the promoter organized 3 corporations and became president of them all. Freshly painted and a new center stone, the warmth of all it spread through the town. Soon things began to hum. To ensure foolproof continuous operation, 61 rules and regulations were adopted. Pass.
Della?
Hey, but alas, this bright scene was not long in darkening. Confusion replaced serenity. It was found that some drunks yearned for education, but doubted if they were alcoholics. The personality defects of others could be cured, maybe, with a loan. Some were club-minded, but it was just a question of taking care of a lonely heart. Sometimes the swarming applicants would go for all 3 floors. Some would start at the top and come through to the bottom, becoming club members. Others started in the club, pitched a binge, were hospitalized, and graduated to the education on the 3rd floor. It was a beehive of activity. All right, but unlike a beehive, it was confusion compounded. An AA group, as such, simply couldn't handle this sort of project. All too late, that was discovered. Then came the inevitable explosion. Something like that day the boiler burst in Wombly's clapboard factory. A chill, choked damp of fear and frustration fell over the group. When that lifted, a wonderful thing happened. The head promoter wrote the foundation office. He said he wished he'd paid some attention to AA experience. Then he did something else that was to become an AA classic. It went all over the little card about the golf course size. The cover read, Middleton Group, rule number 1, rule number 62. Once the card was unfolded, a single pungent sentence leaped to the eye. Don't take yourself too damn seriously. Thus, it was under tradition for an AA group had exercised its right to be wrong. Moreover, it had performed a great service for Alcoholics Anonymous because it had been humbly willing to apply the lessons it learned. It had picked itself up with a laugh and gone on to better things. Even the chief architect standing in the ruins of his dream could laugh at himself. And that is the very same acme of humility.
Thank you, Della. So for those who hear us say Rule 62 in our nighttime meeting, this is where we find that rule. Rule 62, don't take yourself too damn seriously. It's a good one. We absolutely like it. All right, now we'll go on over to the topic and discussion questions to get the conversation started from the AA Grapevine Traditions Checklist. Tradition 4, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 1. Do I insist that there are only a few right ways of doing things in AA? 2. Does my group always consider the welfare of the rest of AA, of nearby groups, of loners in Alaska, of internationalists miles from port, of a group in Rome or El Salvador? 3. Do I put down other members' behavior when it is different from mine, or do I learn from it? 4. Do I always bear in mind that to those outsiders who know I am in AA, I may, to some extent, represent our entire beloved fellowship. 5, am I willing to help a newcomer go to any lengths, his lengths, not mine, to stay sober? 6, do I share my knowledge of AA tools with other members who may not have heard of them? Great tradition. I love this tradition. So a couple points that I wanted to share on before we get the conversation going and see where we go is number one is, as someone who travels a lot, I got to go to a lot of meetings in different areas. And, I can say every group is different. And they do things that are different. And like a person who travels to a foreign country, I like to kind of test the waters where I'm at. So, I listen for clues and I go by the customs of that meeting. I certainly don't sit in the meeting and say, oh, that's not the way you do it. But you just kind of listen and get the lay of the land and see what you can add to the stream of life, so to say. I don't say the Lord's Prayer in my meetings, but I know a lot of the American meetings do say it. And so, instead of saying, oh, I don't say that prayer, it's like, oh, I don't know that one. We don't do that one in my area. I'll listen along and follow along. And now I've learned it through various Zoom meetings that I've attended. I do want to say one thing that the pandemic has brought up tradition for a lot. Being involved in general service, this is probably the tradition we're falling back on the most, and that is with groups reopening or transitioning with the opening. And there's been a lot of topics and discussions on the internet groups for AA as well, where they're not following health ordinances or not requiring certain things or meeting in underground locations. Yes, we are autonomous, but those kind of things are what does affect AA as a whole. So, last night I had the pleasure of being invited to someone's 1-year anniversary, and it was in a park, and the bylaw is a 50 people meeting. So the meeting was way too big. There was way too many people there. And the host home group of the meeting, they had to step up and say, we're too big. We need a few responsible members to leave to make way. And the sad thing was that newcomers started leaving. And people that knew the person whose birthday it was stayed. And I thought, what a tragedy. The meeting is for the newcomer, right? So of course I gave up my seat and I left and came home and got on the Zoom meeting. But these are things that are mindful to be because they affect AA as a whole. If we're meeting in parks and we're groups of 75 to 100 and the public sees that, they'll say, oh, that group of AAs in the park, they're ignoring health guidelines. And or like we've had one group got on the news here because they were meeting at the beach. That's where Tradition 4 is really important right now. Yes, we are autonomous and we get to make our own decisions, but those kind of things are the big picture that affect AA as a whole. And, and in speaking to the question here, number 4, I am very public about my sobriety. I'm not a public member of AA because of Tradition 11, but, I have to walk and handle myself in all instances as an AA member, even if I'm not saying it, because people do know that I'm very active in the community. And so, we have to remember these things that, I am just a drunk, but I can have this reflection. And we'll get to Tradition 11 another day. I love Tradition 4. I like podium meetings. So when I go to meetings where people share from their chair, I'm always like, oh, this should be a podium meeting. But it's not my place because that group has had their group conscience to make that choice. The best way to get group conscience is to take a bunch of sponsees and your friends to a meeting and then you have a bigger vote. Anyways, that's just a little side note. All right, let's start the conversation on Tradition 4. So good to see some faces we haven't seen in a few days. Who would like to start us off on Tradition 4? Yvette.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Yeah, okay. Yvette Alcoholic, glad to be in here doing the traditions, and thank you, Kimberly, for your share, and totally can relate to that. I was thinking about Tradition 4, and it's so cool hearing Della read the Rule 62 because it's so interesting. Because I'm like, you hear stuff from old timers or people sharing, and you're like, that's where that is. It's on page 149 in the fourth tradition. So it's just so cool to know exactly where that came from in the big book, and it's so important. And autonomy is important that we can still have our own type of meeting as long as we're not causing harm to Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole worldwide. And yeah, I mean, I like I shared the other time with Tradition 3. I learned things the hard way, not always, but a lot of times, and being teachable, and I think that was the last paragraph too. Fatigue, kind of with a smile. Don't take ourselves so seriously because we're all learning and growing together, no matter how long we've been here. It's still one day at a time. So yeah, I moved to Tennessee for 6 years for a job, and they have AA there too. And I got to stay sober one day at a time. And being here in California, we clap after the meetings, and it's so funny because for the first like 6 months or 3 months, whatever it was, it's like habit. I moved there, I was 2.5 years sober, and so they would just say, "Oh, that's Yvette. She's from California," and I had to be like, anyway. So it is what it is, and I did try to tell them how to do AA at that time, and I learned lessons that Anyway, we're all part of the big deal, and it's just so when we get back to the basics, they all stand alone but on each other of the traditions like the steps do. And it's just so great. I get to learn and relearn. And this tradition study that we're doing has it's just been so inspiring and enlightening, revisiting and relearning and being together. So anyone new, welcome. Your life's going to change, and in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you. We clap after them too. And my sponsor's favorite thing is she laughs because she goes, "Yeah, Kimberly, she's Canadian. They take cakes up there. Not everybody takes a cake for their anniversary. These are fun traditions we get to have." Della.
Good morning, ladies, fellow alcoholic. I guess it's more of a question. Some of the ladies from my treatment center, we were getting together via Zoom, and there wasn't much talk of AA, like just our progress. And then I found out that a couple of them went to their monitoring people, I guess, and asked if that meeting could be considered an AA meeting. And we don't discuss anything with AA. And so I haven't been going because anytime I did mention the big book or AA as a whole, I was shut down. And so am I wrong in that? Or like, what do you ladies think about that? I was just posing a question. So thanks, Kim.
Well, I always like to say there's the spiritual answer and then there's the Kim answer. So the spiritual answer is that any 2 to 3 people who gather together can call themselves an AA meeting. But the Kim answer is not all AA meetings are created equally. I myself prefer ones that speak of God and the big book, and so I tend not to go to ones that don't. But yeah, any 2 or 3 that get together can call themselves an AA meeting. There's no requirement that we be actually using the literature in which our program is found. Yeah. I just don't stay near them. And you know, that's the unfortunate thing, like, of people who need to give credit for having attended to AA. They don't know that the quality isn't the same, right? Quantity does not equal quantity when it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous, as is in parenting. Lisa G.
Yes, I'm definitely an alcoholic, and I qualify for the program as outlined in the book, but I'm a real alcoholic, and, you know, I've got very, very tender feelings. And when it comes to things like you're not allowed here because blank, or you're not welcome at our meeting because you're not our kind of straight or our kind of sober, I'd be dead. I was actually outed from a big book meeting in West Vancouver because, in the leader's words, I was praying to the wrong God and I was never going to get sober. And had that not community welcomed me on a regular basis, aside from their lead at that term of service, every meeting that I came to, whether I was day 0 or day 4 or day 12 or on my way to a 30-day trip again, if they hadn't kept looking over, is there anybody in the first 60 days with that, and I would feel it, right? Is there anybody in their first 60 days or coming back? And I would feel the whole community of 100 plus look at me. What is she on this week? Or who is she with this week in between Tuesdays? I wouldn't have been able to get sober or acquire the desire. So the autonomy of that community, welcoming people in various states of inebriation, is the only reason I'm sober. Moving forward, 1044, had they not accepted me in my various states of medicatedness, I too would not be sober. So because I was attending fellowship meetings of as open-minded as they could be for me and my way of coming in, have they not shown me love and tolerance in my way of approaching AA, with one toe in, sitting back with my arms crossed? Guess what? I could be dead. So I was in a traditions meeting yesterday about tradition 3 in relationships, and I'm going to be going to that meeting weekly. The traditions save my life. The steps give me principles with which to live it, but the traditions have given me a life because there's a place to go. The steps are just the principles. The community is what has saved me. And the leader of this meeting knows just how deeply that statement is true. Back to you, Kim.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Love you. Lisa brought up a good point, and it's not one that I am a fan of, but that is that Tradition 4 does actually permit meetings to exclude people. The way I like it to be used is that this is a women's meeting. So we don't allow men here. That we are autonomous and we are allowed to make that decision. We are a ladies group. We're for women to have a safe space to come and have sobriety. But it does sometimes get taken other ways where it can be very exclusive. And in sobriety, that's not necessary. I do want to read something to you guys. It just, you know me, if it comes up, I like to go there. So this was sent to me because we did have someone who was being disruptive at the 164. And it has to do rightly with Tradition 4. And so I just want to share it because having knowledge is having power. So what it does say is, I want to affirm the ability of a trusted servant of a group or as a group as a whole to censure or remove from that group's membership a person. Although the preamble states that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, this applies to membership to AA as a whole, not to specific meetings. Each meeting being autonomous, they have a right to restrict attendance at that particular meeting. This is what allows us to have Tradition 8 meetings or special worker meetings, for example. In doing so, we are not denying a person the ability to attend AA meetings or to consider themselves a member of AA. Instead, we are acting in accordance with the 4th tradition. And further, it is confirmed in a letter written by Bill W. in 1969. This amount of charity does not mean that we cannot exclude those who disturb meetings or who seriously interfere with the functioning of the group. Such people can be asked to quiet down or go elsewhere, or to come back when they are better able to participate. This is further confirmed by the GSO in a letter in which they state, "The group is not banning the member from Alcoholics Anonymous. They are banning him or her from attending this meeting for a specific amount of time, and alternative meetings options are presented." I've seen this happen once in a real life situation, and it was to a gentleman whose behavior towards the female members was unbecoming, and he was told he's not welcome here anymore. But, I would not want to see that used as a way to just kick people out. But it is used as a way when there is a big disturbance to keep the unity of the group, which as Tradition 1 protects as being the group is more important than the individual. Please move on to another meeting until you're better able to participate, and then you're welcome back. We've had drunks show up at our meeting. And although we care to be super helpful to those who are drunk who have a desire, if they're disrupting the meeting, what's the purpose? So thanks for bringing that up, Lisa. It's worth having it talked about because you never know when that little nugget's going to need to be pulled out of the file cabinet. Deborah.
Hi, I'm Deborah. I'm an alcoholic. It's really good to see all of you. I haven't been able to participate in this wonderful meeting in a few meetings since we started Traditions. And I just wanted to comment on Della's situation. I'm not sure that when she was meeting with her recovery friends, whether it was started as an AA meeting, that's, you have to set the intention for an AA meeting. I think it's important to note that an AA meeting is one thing, meeting with people about recovery is something else. And you have to take care of yourself. And it's always a good idea to be the good example as well. What they do with their, say, when they take credit with that as a meeting, that's their business. You know what's right for you. You're such a lovely, I just loved seeing you here. And the other thing is I have experienced many different times when we've had drunks come into the meeting, or when I've gone to women's meetings when a man has walked in and they have just attacked him. I'm always like, wait a minute, we need to pause. That's why it's really important to have people with years of sobriety in a meeting. It's support our recovery, and it's so good to do the traditions and learn how they came up. So that's all I really wanted to say, and say hi.
Hi. And yes, the fun thing about Traditions is that people have already had the trial and error, and we get to learn from their experience, which is great. Joanne.
Hi everyone, I'm Joanne. I'm an alcoholic addict and grateful to be sober today. When I see this Tradition 4, I think of the issue of talking about drugs as part of your story. And there are some meetings where they're like, we only want to hear alcohol. That's it. We don't want to hear about alcohol. Then I've been to meetings where it's like, okay, we don't want to hear about drugs, but if you're doing drugs, you're not sober, but you can't talk about it. So that got complicated. And I've also heard, every group is autonomous. And my husband has this great saying that I like, which is life is self-flushing. And I'm powerless over other groups' decisions. I need to go take care of me. And if I'm not thriving in a group, I can't save the group thinking I can save the group. I just need to move along because it just gets complicated and it can set up resentments. I I mean, I can go to a meeting and I can express my opinion and all this sort of stuff. But if I don't agree with the group's decision and it really affects my mental health, or keeps promoting resentment, then I need to move along, because the group needs to try it. And my favorite line is, "How's it working for you?" And it can get crazy. I was at a meeting where this woman, she was telling her story, and part of her story was just also included food. And there was a whole rumor mill after phone calls like, "How dare someone talk about this is not OA and this and that?" And that woman was like, "I'm never going to that meeting ever again." So it can, and the problem with that was that it wasn't a group decision. It wasn't. It was this one woman taking a total hissy fit and running around, and so it wasn't even brought to the discussion where we could learn the traditions and apply the traditions. And that's the key. If you have any doubt, if something isn't right on how your group works, just run it through the tradition mill, grind it up, talk about the traditions. Does it apply? Does it not apply? And most of the time, there's some clarity, and people learn, oh, there are traditions. And again, try it, see how it works. And if it doesn't work, you can have another business meeting and rehash all over again, because it is a day at a time and a meeting at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, I like to get the lay of the land. I book quite a bit in advance for my speaking engagements, and I'm like, okay, what A is this? Because sometimes it's not just AA, and I'm like, okay, do I swear here? Can I talk about drugs here? What? And then just give you a quick little rundown of what you're where you're at. But your share made me think of this story about the baby in the car. Have I told you guys the story about the baby in the car, the Tradition 4 story? So our Tradition 8 worker from our central office is one of my friends, and she went to a closed meeting. And so a lady had come to the meeting, and she had her child with her. She was fresh out of treatment, I think 2 days out of treatment. And the gentleman said, "No children allowed here." So she put the baby in the car. It was like maybe 2 or 3 years old, and she was sitting in the meeting. So she's sitting next to Colleen. I know, Bonnie, you know Colleen. This lady's sitting next to Colleen at the meeting. She's like fidgety, looking at her clock, and Colleen's like, "What is wrong with you?" She's like, "How long is this meeting? And she's like, "What's going on with you?" And she's pretty blunt like I am, and she goes, "Well, the guy up there told me I wasn't allowed to bring my child into the meeting, so I left him in the car, and I got to get out there to check on him." That's something where, had he, like Joanne said, asked someone else, "Hey, this lady's 2 days out of treatment, she needs a meeting, she's got her child," they would have made an exception. So to not be just making these decisions on your own, that poor lady, Colleen lost her mind and was like, "Who's your GSR?" Oh yeah, it was a fun little traditions workshop after that. Bonnie!
It's me again.
Hi!
Hi, everybody. My name's Bonnie. I'm an alcoholic. That story about the baby in the car, holy smokes. Anyways, this kind of goes to what Della was talking about, because I've been having my own little conundrum in that, as we all know, every group kind of has its own culture. So I go, I'm a member of 164 and a member of a face-to-face meeting. And the face-to-face meeting, I've been finding more, the membership's kind of changing. I've been finding more and more that it's kind of, without exaggeration, all drunkalogs, very little solution in the meeting being spoken of. So I was thinking I was going to leave that meeting, and I spoke yesterday to my sponsor about it, and so what she said was, she says, "Well, isn't it obvious?" She says, "That's your job then, is to bring solution to that meeting." So, anyways, I'm taking a pause on this to try and figure it out, but I kind of get what she's talking about. If they're not talking big book at all, if they're not, to me, that's what AA is. So maybe it is my job. Anyways, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I'm hearing a lot of that very story. And that's what we can do. We can carry this message to those meetings, and we can share. You know, my experience is they quit picking you to share after a while. That's my personal experience with when I talk about God in the big book at Not God. And they just stop asking me to share, and then I kind of give up. Then you wait a while, you go back, and they pick you. They're like, oh, damn, that was that girl we forgot. Jennifer K.
Hey, I'm Jennifer, alcoholic. So I hope that this is a proper question, but last Wednesday, there's a local ladies group here that I've been going to, and that's where I picked up my in-town sponsor from way back a couple months ago. It feels like forever. But anyway, we went out to dinner first, and the lady that opens the doors, Yvette is at the Suburban Club. Yvette's from my town. Or not, she spent a couple years here in my town. Anyway, hey, Yvette. And so before I knew it, I was like, well, I'll do it. And then I was like, what just came out of my mouth about leading the meeting? And then I was like, oh, no, I haven't been sober a year yet. You probably have a rule. I was like, no, there's no rule, Jennifer. You can do it. We'll help you. So I led the meeting. We had a newcomer in the meeting, and we didn't get a topic. It's an open topics meeting. And so because we had a newcomer, I went with the what it was like, what happened, and what's it like now. And you know, for a lot of people that can turn into like a drunkalog, as you say. And I know for me, I'm still kind of fairly new. I'm a little over 4 months, but when I hear drunkalogs, it just makes me want to drink, you know, so I don't like to listen to those too much. And so I had one person in the meeting, I could tell the lady who's been founding member of this club, which has been around for 20-some years, she was giving me the eye to, you know, to cut her off. And so I eventually, you know, I did, and I just told her, thank you for sharing. But one of the things that she ended with that just didn't sit right with me, and this is what I really want to ask you guys about, is she said, I know in some AA meetings, they don't like you to talk about God and Jesus Christ like is our Savior, and that you know, He is the only God, and you know, the Bible is, you know, is the book. And so it was kind of going, I don't want to go too far, but it was going down that path. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, I've been in enough of these meetings, like with you guys from all over the world, you know, and I've heard from a lot of people. I mean, she and I know her, and she and I share the same beliefs. So it's not like I had a problem. But I'm sitting there thinking I've got a newcomer, and you know, for a lot of people, I've heard that turns people off from coming to AA or staying with AA, and that's not what the big book says, you know, because I've been to lots of Tony's big book studies. So, you know, so I've picked up some knowledge along the way, and before I knew it, I found myself after, you know, I thanked her for sharing, of just saying what the big book says, that, you know, it's a God of our understanding, and that's a God that could be different. It could mean something different, like to everybody, you know, to each person. And that the writers of the big book, you know, they wrote it as the God of our understanding, so that each of us would always feel like we have a home in AA. And so I thought I was doing a good thing, you know, like I thought, okay, I'm kind of bringing it to the big book and what the big book's about. And she left. She got up and left. And so I was like, oh, shit. You know, I ran somebody out of AA. Oh, my God. My first meeting, I ran somebody out. So I don't know if I should have said something or not. But it just, I went with my gut, and I did. And I don't know. I'm curious for you guys' thoughts. And if it's not appropriate, if it's better for another tradition, I'm still curious. I can bring it up another time, Kim, but I'm just really curious for this group's whiteness and expertise.
My theory is if it comes out, it's meant to happen. What they do with it is up to them. And what Tony, myself, and Joe always say is you got to disturb them to change it up. You know, you don't change if you're comfortable. You don't. you're gonna stay right where you are if nobody disturbs you. It'll make her think whatever you don't know. We always think it's always about us, but we don't know what, maybe like her cat just puked in front of her and she had to get off. It might not have been anything you said. But one thing I will say is if you're in a meeting and there's a lot of newcomers, a good sharing advice is make the topic step 1, tradition 3. Instead of experience, strength, and hope, you're going to weed out war stories, and you'll keep people who don't know anything about step 1 and tradition 3. They'll be quiet because you'll say, yeah, for our newcomers, we're going to make tonight's topic tradition 3. Half of them won't know what that means, so they won't put their hand up. So it's a good way to steer the conversation. Joanne's laughing. See, I kept my defects. There's some I use for good. But you can steer the conversation that way, because when we say experience, strength, and hope, people go off. You lose your meaning when you make that a topic. But if you say, for the newcomers, let's talk about step 1 or tradition 3, and then you'll get people who have something probably better to say than experience, strength, and hope. But you know what? We don't apologize for God. One thing I will is that you can always refer to page 46. 46 in the big book's really good. I wish I would have taped my share from last night, Della. It was on that topic. But yeah, 46 is a good page for those that might be testy on the God thing. It's, I think, the 4th paragraph down. All righty. Kathy Ann.
Hi, I'm Kathy Ann. I'm an alcoholic. I just wanted to, I go to just all women's meetings. I have about 4 that I go to in Bellingham and Ferndale. And so one of the meetings, it's all women's. That's what I can go to mixed Zoom meetings, but in-person meetings. I only go to female meetings. So a man walked into one of our meetings and he looked really desperate. He really wanted a meeting. And somebody said, well, this is a women's meeting, but we'll take a vote if he can stay. And I thought, if everybody votes to let him stay, then I'm leaving. But anyway, nobody voted to have him stay, but the chairperson took him outside and gave him a pamphlet of all the list of all the meetings in the area. So that's how we handled that. And it turns out that they're meeting like within a couple hours in the same place. So it worked out. But I'm just not comfortable with in person. I was hit on a couple times, and I'm just uncomfortable sharing with men. Although I go to some Zoom meetings and I've met some really wonderful people. But anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you know what it is? Unfortunately, it is a double standard. But for a woman to mosey into a men's meeting, usually the old timers are very gracious and allow us to stay. But for a man to come into a women's meeting, it is a little different. I'm going to admit that. And it is that safe space where women, a lot of us have a lot of trauma with regards to men. You know, like a group of men at a meeting isn't going to have on the majority, 12 men that have had trauma because of a woman. It's usually the other way around, and that's just how society is, unfortunately. So it is a double standard that I see. Della and I moseyed on into a men's meeting once. They let us stay. They wouldn't call on us to share, though. Oh, yeah, that was a fun day. Lisa G.
Wow, I'm just remembering here this time where I accidentally went to the Perez Club around the corner from Cathedral Canyon, the condo we were staying in, and I showed up at the Perez Club, and I was anticipating that it was going to be a step meeting. It was a like M and F, and there were like 6 guys sitting around this table, and they didn't say take a seat. What they said was, this is a man's meeting, and please come back at your regular 7:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning meeting, or come back when the women are here. And I really needed a meeting. I was having a moment with my parents, and I really fucking needed people. That was before I knew to depend on God before man, or to ask God first, then go to people. That was before I knew that. COVID changed all that, and actually Dad's dying process changed that. But ultimately, I did have to go to God anyway, and went back home and dealt with my muttering out loud in that damn AA fellowship, blah, blah. Got over it, went back to another meeting, and, went back to taking care of my parents and myself, and ate some citrus fruit probably, and got on with my day and went back to the meeting where there were women there and men, or just women at Holly's place on the hill by Bob Hope's house. But yeah, without the traditions, I'll say I get pissed off sometimes too because I'm human, and I do to completely agree with what the lead was saying about it's not about being liked, it's about saving people's lives and helping them find sobriety and a power greater than themselves. If you don't disturb the shit, you're never going to go to the can, people. So you've got to disturb the shit to get things moving. There is nothing more deadly than stagnancy. So I will encourage you to get disturbed, keep asking questions, keep being annoyed, and express your anger, because when you don't, I don't agree with the basic text where it says anger is the dubious luxury of normal men. Anger is a very human thing, and if you don't express it, it can be very deadly. So just say your piece and move on. Thanks. So that you can get to PEACE. Say your PEICE. Keep going. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much, please. I'm going to go to Joanne, but Gloria, are you frozen or are you there? Glow, I'm going to call you next, so maybe figure out your internet. Joanne. Unmute.
Okay. All right. I'm going to really shake up this conversation. What's the group? Because I belong to a meeting that met every single day, and their meeting used to be 15 minutes on a Friday before the meeting ended so they could get attendance. So they started making these decisions, but half of the people that made the decision were not members of the group, maybe. So what is the group? My personal opinion, a group is a collection of people that are invested in the meeting and go to the business meeting. So to have policy made 15 minutes before a meeting ends, you got people voting that may come this week, may not come this week. So there's no cohesion about how the decision's going to roll out and everything. So it really gets complicated. So I just really wanted to say that clarity is really helpful to define, especially with newcomers. There's the meeting and there's the group. And how do you become part of the group so that your voice is heard about how the group is going to behave? The other thing, I heard something this morning I just wanted to share because it was so inspiring. Someone said, yes, we stand on the shoulders of giants, but sometimes you have to get off, land on the floor, and carry the message yourself.
I like that.
Just loved it.
Yeah, but yeah, you know what? I agree with you. The group, in my opinion, is those who attend the business meeting and are part of the service structure of that meeting. But if we go back to tradition 2, the group conscience is making God our ultimate authority. So if there needs to be a decision made right then and there regarding an attendee at a meeting, I would say that group conscience is the loving voice of God. But for me, yeah, all group decisions is who goes to the business meeting and who is part of the service structure.
And I was going to a meeting with a lot of old timers. They never had a business meeting ever. And I'm like, no, it's all taken care of. And I'm like, but how do you teach any newcomer that comes in? You know? So anyways.
I had a group and I was on a crusade. I was a bit of a bleeding deacon and I wanted to bring the solution to my area because there was no solution-based meetings in my area, as Lucia can attest. And I was like, I'm going to go to this meeting on Saturday nights and I'm going to make it my home group and I'm going to make some changes there. And there was only 4 home group members, so I was like, if I bring all my sponsees, we're going to have an increased vote and we can make some changes. And then, of course, all my sponsees would never show up because God was not going to let me have my way. And there was one guy there, and he was the one who made all the decisions. And man, oh man, did I tell you. So what did he do? He assigned me the position of secretary, so I never even got to share. Nobody got my message, and I just sat at that stupid meeting every day for 6 months. So being a bleeding deacon, it doesn't work all the time. God just shuts a big old thing in your pie hole and tells you to zip it and sit down and learn your lesson. Oh, that was fun. Gloriana. Good morning.
Hello, I am here. How are you? Hello, everyone. And what a beautiful topic today. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. And the thing is that, you know, we learn and we teach by example, and I really believe God speaks through all of us. And it's no coincidence that I'm on this meeting today, because I'll tell you why. We go through things with, like, you know, locally too with meetings. Of course, there's many that don't have, I know one in particular, that don't have business meetings. They are only like a few people that are the group elders. I don't want to get into the whole shebang, but the whole thing is that there's not too much of a group conscience going on. And then that said, one of the meetings that I attend, that I'm part of, you know, we kind of were scrambling, you know, during the COVID thing, you know, just trying to figure out the Zoom thing, trying to figure out all the IT stuff and the whole thing like that. And I feel like the meeting has kind of veered into like just making private decisions rather than group conscience. So it's absolutely timely that I'm hearing this too, because, you know, I made a donation this morning to World Service Organization, but somebody else in the group said, why didn't you do it to the district? And it's like, okay, I'll do another one to the district, but it's just that it's it goes to show you how we work, and the wheel has to be cohesive and connected. You know, it has to be a we issue all the time. And everything that was shared before, I mean, I've seen those things before happen. Would you get a group where, you know, there's somebody inappropriate, and there was something like that going on in, you know, in the area. There's a person who has outside issues and was very disruptive and inappropriate and gropey and the whole thing like that. And I was like, why don't you ask him to leave? Why are you letting him stay? Well, we can't refuse him. And it's like, well, you know, he's got his other issues are more glaring, but maybe that was my opinion. But it really was disruptive because I had first come out here from New York, and one of the meetings I went to was very, very large, and this person who's, you know, just off the, you know, he was just, whatever, had emotional issues, deep emotional issues, psychological disorders, whatever. He would just go in there and just eat the cookies, smoke, and go outside. So one time we went to do our Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting, he ran across this gymnasium and groped me. And I was sort of like, I don't know what happens to women where you feel like you've grown up in a culture where, you know, you're so dumbstruck with, oh my God, that just happened. And luckily a few people, I mentioned after the fact what happened, but he was still allowed to go to other meetings and disrupt and grope people and all this other stuff. So that was a little bit disturbing. Then I've seen the other ones that get very strict, where they get an agenda. And that's also disruptive, you know. There was someone that she was very well-meaning, but she had an outside religious agenda. So she wanted to go in and see her prospects as people that she could save their souls as well. Not so much get sober. And she got involved in service, and what happened is that she gave door prizes to, we had an anniversary meeting like many years ago, it's like 10 years ago, and this poor woman who was struggling and just coincidentally happened to be Jewish, she got the door prize for the person who's the newest, because she gave one to the person who was the oldest in the recovery, who had the longest sobriety, and the one who had just had new sobriety. So she gave her a blinking cross. And the woman was completely freaked out. And at the time, I was with my ex-husband. And we just said, listen, don't let this disrupt your sobriety. Stick with it. You know, that's her version of higher power. We understand, we got that you have a different higher power. Or don't pay any attention. That's not really AA. And thank God she didn't, you know, she listened. But it's things like that that can get very disruptive. And then I've seen people that get into a political agenda in the rooms. And one guy was campaigning one time, nobody said anything, and another guy was talking about a lot of hateful stuff and very unenlightened. And it just, those things can be very dangerous. And I think that that's where people that have better sobriety could just say, excuse me, we have to remember our preamble. We're not allied with any religious organization, particular sects, political organizations. We don't take sides on outside positions on outside issues, and that we have to really temper that kind of speech, because it's very interesting. Even the story of how God as we understand God, and it's very easy for people to become very myopic. Thank you for letting me share. I hope that made sense. Love you.
Thank you so much, Glow. Love you so much. Sharon, our last happy little blue hand, but certainly not the least.
I realize we're just at the end here.
So good.
Thank you. I'm Sharon. I'm an alcoholic. And you were talking earlier about excluding people for legitimate reasons, like it being a men's meeting or a women's meeting. I had an experience, and I just believe that and somebody else said earlier too, that we need to pause before we react, that we're not so focused on rules that we take that pause time. I was in another state. My son, had just turned 3 years sober. My son, living in this other state, had had a traumatic brain injury. He was in a coma in the hospital, and I flew down there. And I visit. You're only allowed a certain amount of time to visit in an ICU, and so I had my time. And then I noticed in the hospital there was this sign about an AA meeting in the basement, it turns out to be. And, I'm in a state of shock. I went down, I saw the people sitting in the room. The meeting had already started. I went in, I sat down. After it was all over, I realized that must have been a men's meeting. There must have been 25 to 30 men there. And when I went in, I didn't notice. And like I said, I'm in a state of shock. The men eventually called on me, and I was able to say whatever it was that was on my heart at that time. I'm out of town, and I just needed to go to a meeting. And they thanked me for being there and sharing. And then the meeting was over. And truthfully, I don't remember if anybody talked to me afterwards or not. But I really, in retrospect, because I've been in a lot of meetings too over the years, where a man will come in and, they'll say, oh, it's a women's meeting. But, I just think it was God's grace that allowed those men to just accept me. I didn't hear any word they said. I mean, like I said, I was in a state of shock, and it must have been very obvious to them. So I just wanted to share that story. Sometimes the rules need to be bent. Thank you.
Absolutely. And you sharing made me think of a situation here where we have a member in our community who does have a serious brain injury, and he is still a long-standing member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He had a motorcycle accident, but frequently people won't ask him to share because of the way he speaks, and they exclude him. And that, to me, I pick him every time I chair that meeting and he's present, because everyone has a voice, and you'll see that in rooms. And although we're autonomous, everybody deserves to belong, and everybody deserves to be heard. And you don't know who God is choosing to help someone. Someone's story could trigger something in someone, and it could start a ripple of love and tolerance. It could give them hope that someone they know that's struggling could get well as well. And it really makes me sad when I go to meetings and they pick the same friends or the same group members every time. Like, we got to remember that to be inclusive, like, we are all just drunks. We're passengers of a cruise ship drowning in the water. Nobody's got Louis Vuitton luggage. We're all in the pool. So get over it and listen and be loving and tolerant. And that's just my little public service announcement to end off the meeting today.